All right, guys, now we're jumping into our second unit of content here. We will finish this up this week. We're going to talk about blood vessels and circulation. In this section, we'll talk about the anatomy of the blood vessels. In the next section, we will talk about how blood flows through those vessels. So blood vessels allow for the transportation of substances in the blood. Yeah, that's pretty obvious statement, right? Oxygen and carbon dioxide are bound to blood vessels and some dissolved in the blood as well. Bound to the blood cells and some dissolved in the blood as well. And then nutrients such as calcium, glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, all those things we need for the body to function well. Hormones also travel in the blood, as do waste products. We have three classes of blood vessels, and we've talked about these before already, so I know you guys know them. We have the arteries. So our arteries become progressively smaller as they branch. So arteries leave the heart, as we've talked about. All vessels leaving the heart are called arteries. They start off large, and they're going to become progressively smaller as they get into smaller and smaller branches and finally result in capillaries. The capillaries are those very small blood vessels. Excuse me, guys. Up early as always. So the capillaries are the very small blood vessels that are the site for metabolic exchange. And our veins become progressively larger as they merge and are closer to the heart. So capillaries drop off oxygen, pick up carbon dioxide, drop off nutrients, pick up metabolic waste products. And then those capillaries kind of form, those tiny capillaries meet up and form venules, which then become veins, which then eventually lead back to the heart. So we have things called blood vessel tunics, and tunics are just blood vessel layers. Why are they called tunics and not layers? I don't know, you guys. Your guess is as good as mine, but that's what they're called. So we have the same layers, the same three layers in the arteries as we do in the veins, but they're going to be that different in nature, how big, how much space they take up, their importance, etc. We have the tunica intima, the tunica media, the tunica externa. The tunica externa is going to be on the outside of the blood vessel. The tunica intima is on the inside of the blood vessel, and the tunica media is the middle layer of the blood vessel that's made up of muscle. And we can see that in the arteries, for example, a key clear difference is the amount of muscle tissue, the amount of muscle that we find in the walls of the arteries compared to the walls of the veins. Some other differences we'll notice is that veins have valves. Arteries do not have valves. You can see how blood will flow through an artery, into an arteriole, into the capillaries, and then eventually back into the veins. Oh, and here's our capillary right here. Our capillaries are different. They do not have these three layers. They have a single layer. They have an endothelium and a basement membrane. So that's it. So capillaries do not have these three tunics. Excuse me, they have one tunic. And when we see the word lumen, lumen just means the size of the opening through the blood's going to flow through. So taking a look at these two different, and then we'll break each one of these guys down. They'll each jump out on their own slide here in a second. I guess I had to stop for a second there. So we are looking at the arteries and the veins. So we can see we have three classes of arteries and three classes of veins, and they're not too hard to remember. We have let's see if this is going to give me an effect here or not. Hold on, guys. Let me get this pointer turned off here. So our arteries in general have more elastic and collagen fibers. So here are arteries, and we have the arteries on the right-hand side here because the aorta is coming out, and actually it's on the left, it's the right-hand side of the screen, left-hand side of the heart. So left-hand side of the heart, we have the large aorta. We have the aorta. The aorta is an elastic artery, and we're going to talk about the different arteries here in a minute. But in general, arteries are going to have more elastic and collagen fibers. This is going to maintain their circular shape and help them to better withstand blood pressure changes, right? Because there's no pressure at all in the veins. All the blood pressure is going to be in the arteries as the blood leaves the heart with pressure behind it. Your veins will collapse if there's no blood present. This is why if you've ever had someone taking blood and they may have pierced a vein, they have trouble getting blood from the vein because veins don't have any structure holding them up, and they're held up by the volume of the blood that's going to be within them. Otherwise, they can collapse down pretty easily. That's because they don't have this thick muscular wall that we find in the arteries. All right, so let's talk first about elastic arteries. So our elastic arteries are, hold on one sec. Okay, sorry about that, guys. All right, so get your pencils out. We're not gonna usually write this on the board for you, but we don't have that available, so I'm just gonna talk you through it. So our elastic arteries are our largest arteries, okay? The aorta is an elastic artery. It has those three layers, tunica externa, tunica intima, and the tunica intima, and the tunica media. So in an elastic artery, we've got a nice thick our nice thick tunica media that's made up of a lot of blood vessels. Sorry, it's made up of a lot of muscle. Okay. Um, this first type of artery is called an elastic artery because it's going to have a lot of elastic tissues. So the elastin tissues are shown here with this kind of these dark threads that are going through. So these blood vessels, they are dealing with the blood that's coming directly out of the heart. So they have to be the stretchiest of all the arteries that we have. So they have a higher amount of elastin fibers in them, which is why they're called elastic arteries. Our muscular arteries are not going to stretch as much and they're not going to have as much pressure, but they are going to need to be able to vasodilate and vasoconstrict, right? Just like the elastic arteries are going to do, and like all arteries are going to do. So we have this nice layer of muscle. Our arterioles are our smallest arteries, and the arterioles exist before we branch off into capillaries. They're still going to have a nice amount of muscle compared to the veins, but they're going to be much smaller than the other arteries. Blood then flows into the capillaries. Our capillary is our single cell layer. Oxygen will diffuse out, carbon dioxide will diffuse in. When we are in the muscle, it's going to be flip flop, of course, when we're in the lungs. And we'll talk more about how things diffuse into and out of capillaries when we talk about respiration next week. The capillary beds are really neat. So our arterioles, the smallest layer, are going to be very, very small, and they're going to be surrounded with this layer of smooth muscle on the outside. When these arterioles close up, tighten up, let's say these are the capillaries in your fingers, and you step outside, it's cold, and your body wants to shunt that blood away from the appendages. These arterioles and capillaries will shut down, right? The smooth muscle will tighten up and prevent blood flow from going. Then let's say your hands warm up again, and we're going to have some blood flowing back to them. So the arterioles will vasodilate, and blood will flow, and so will these very small single cell muscle cells wrapped around this capillary here. They're going to control blood flow. When they're open, blood will flow through the capillary bed, supplying oxygen to the tissue that needs it. In the case of muscle, supplying nutrients to the muscle as well. And then as blood passes through the capillary, oxygen is going to diffuse out, carbon dioxide diffuses in, and then we have our deoxygenated blood entering the venule, which will then go to larger and larger veins. Here's our venule. I'm going to try to get my pointer back. All right, here's our venule, and you can see it's got like the smallest possible amount of muscle. It's got a very thick outer layer though, because that is where the structure is going to come from in this case. And then, so we have our venule, medium-sized veins, and large veins. So I know you guys can remember that. And these veins are going to have valves in them. And valves are really important because they prevent the backflow of blood. Because there's no pressure behind this blood coming from the heart itself, right? There's going to be pressure from other places, not from the heart. These valves are really important. These valves are going to prevent blood from flowing back down into them. Would prevent blood from flowing back that way, right? So why are valves so important? Well, valves are important because they prevent the backflow of blood, and they also work with the skeletal muscle pump to get blood flowing back to the heart. This is how this works. So the blood pressure in the veins is too low to overcome the forces of gravity. So our veins have valves in them. So if you've ever, for example, gone out for a run and then you get done and you're too tired to stretch, you just sit down and start drinking your water, and then you get really dizzy all of a sudden. Okay. Or you don't cool off after a workout and you get really dizzy after that workout. This is because you have blood pooling in the legs, because you're not using your skeletal muscle pump. So let's say these are two muscles on each side of a vein. All right. Now, as you walk, those muscles are going to push. They're going to put pressure on those veins. When they put pressure on this vein here, the blood in the middle is going to go up and down both. It's going to just move to get out of the way of the muscles. But when it goes down, it meets up with a valve. It can't go backwards, so it has to go forward. So this is why cool downs are really important, because what they do is literally help to return blood to your brain, return blood to the heart, excuse me, they return blood to the heart and they can be recirculated. That's your skeletal muscle pump. Then here's just a nice overview table. Again, you do not need to memorize this, but we definitely want to remember the names of the 3 different types of arteries, the names of the 3 different types of veins, and we also want to remember our capillaries. And I do want you guys to understand how those arteries and veins are structurally different, and therefore functionally different. Okay, so that's what we're going to use our little assignment for. So jump on over to Canvas and do the assignment associated with this lecture. And then there's one more lecture to go for our anatomy lectures for the week. Then we'll be done.